Hello, campers. This is Luke Glasser, and I'm here with the Code Clash Wrestling with email developers in 2024. We're going to have a great session for you today. We're going to be talking about dark mode as well as how to put the smackdown on code bloat. So join me right now. And first, let me tell you a little bit about myself in case you don't know who I am. I started in email in 2005. Working at a B2B trade publisher where I coded about 20 to 25 emails a week. In my career since then, I have coded literally over 10,000 emails. A lot of people know me for doing a lot of stuff with metrics. I led the same project back in the early 2000s, creating email standards for metrics measurement. And I do a lot on writing and speaking on metrics today. I also have served as a judge at the Echo Awards, checking out cool creative and different things for that. So a lot of experience in email, and today I'm going to put it to work for you to show you how to do dark mode. So we're going to start out with, a little bit about the dark mode versus our subscribers. Then we're going to get into the coding and, what to do to enable it within your emails. Then I'm going to turn to putting the smackdown on code bloat. This is something that affects a lot of us, getting out old stuff that you don't need, redundant code, things like that. And finally, I have some exciting news in our Outlook returns for a rematch that I learned from a friend of mine, Justin Q, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's get started with dark mode versus subscribers. So what is dark mode, you may ask? Dark mode is a screen setting that switches colors from light, typically a white background, to a dark background, typically black. You can see in my 2 Memorial Day emails here the difference between the light mode on the left and dark mode on the right. So you see that I controlled what the colors inverted to and the shade of black that I wanted. And you can do this with your own code. This works best on, our favorite email client, Apple, because they support everything good. So let's start out about why do subscribers like dark mode? And a lot of them do. And that is because, well, one thing that people like about it is that it supposedly reduces eye strain. And for myself, I do use dark mode on my phone, and it does help with that. Other people just like the way it looks. It's their personal preference. And then finally, some people believe that it reduces battery consumption. I've seen a few different studies about how much it reduces battery consumption. The honest answer is for most people, it's probably like 3 to 5%. It's not the double-digit savings on your battery. But hey, if I was down to my final few bars of battery, I might use that where I'm trying to get out every last minute to make it to that charging port. So here's the startling fact. In 2024, 82% of smartphone users use dark mode. And that comes from EarthWeb. I've also seen some people say 90% and higher have dark mode. In my own tests, right? One of the things I will tell people is whenever you're thinking about introducing new code elements, use a tool like Email on Acid, send out a test email, find out what percentage with the pixel, what percentage or an actual campaign are using dark mode, what percentage are the clients they use, right? So for my audiences, it's typically 50 to 65%. And this is what really spurred me to get into dark mode the last couple years in all of our emails, whether it's, welcome templates or regular weekly emails. It's a massive adoption. About 2/3 of the opens I see are related to dark mode. So what supports it? Well, we got a bunch of desktop and webmail clients on one side, and then we got the opposing team of mobile apps, right? So iPhone and iPad mail, the Gmail app in Android and iOS, and Outlook to a degree all support dark mode for mobile. And then on the other side of the ring, we got Apple Mail, Outlook 2021, regardless of OS, Outlook.com, the web version, the Office 360 version, and in theory, Windows Mail. But so now we know these are the ones that support it to varying degrees. and we'll get into about how that support works a little bit later. So let's jump right in to dark mode versus email coders. So now email coders, you're ready to put the smack down on dark mode and start coding it into your emails. So one of the things I like that I mentioned before about checking your sources, right? This wonderful table shows support. This was made by Email on Acid for, does it fully invert the colors? Does it kind of partially invert them? And what are the clients and how they work? I highlighted Gmail here because what you'll see is that Gmail kind of does dark mode, I guess is how I would put it. They don't really do well at reading your media queries, but there is another technique called blends that we can use, and I'll get to that towards the end of this section. So the way you enable dark modes is by adding some meta tags to your header section, and then you use the classes to control the content and the colors. This works very similar. Basically, it's the same thing as doing your responsive design media queries, where you're making the queries for your mobile apps. So first you start out by adding these two meta tags to the header to tell it that, hey, we're going to support a dark mode profile or whatever you want to call it within the email client, right? So this shows the two supported color schema that you can use. Okay. And like I said, it is all controlled in the header CSS. So we're going to define the classes just like you would do for like, hey, I have an image that goes to full width and responsive. I can also set, define these are my font colors, just like doing responsive, but it does go in its own section. So you might see, there's the media query starts out with the preferences for dark and light mode, and then you put in your styles for how you want it to do it. One thing I will note is that a lot of people and guides still talk about this data OGSC app selector declaration. I'm not exactly sure the technical term for that, but that is to help with cross-client compatibility, very specifically with Outlook. That's why we use both. We used to use that for certain versions of the forms, certain versions of like Android and stuff like that. And one thing I will tell you to do is when you're coding for dark mode, instead of having to make like 10 new classes and then double tag everything, what I tend to do is just use the same names of classes that I used in my responsive section for doing responsive design on mobile. I use that same name, so it might be like mobile font or headline or whatever the name of the class is. Tend to use those same ones, especially around text, because that makes it a lot easier to handle. One thing I like to do is I like to break the different sections. So I might have like, hey, here's a section that's wrapped in style tags. That's my general. Other hand, there we go. General, like styles, like that's where I put like Google's U plus body tag and Apple links and things like that. Then the next section might be my responsive code for mobile. That's in its own section. And then because I've already dark mode last, dark mode is the bottom section, and they each go within their own like style block. One of the reasons why you do this is if Google or Gmail decides it doesn't like something in a style block, it'll just ignore everything within there and throw it all out. And I'm not sure if other clients do that too, but I know they do it. And this declaration that you'll find in virtually every guide on dark mode, the root declaration, when I had that mixed in with my main style block, then it stopped being responsive in Gmail for both the app, for the ones I tested, which was iOS and Android, as well as like the iOS, Chrome on iOS and Windows. So what I did is I moved this little code snippet right into its own little style block. And then if a various client doesn't like that, it doesn't stop it from reading the rest of the code. You may be wondering what this actually does. So what this does is it tells it to apply this. Basically, you see this a lot in web design. It applies this to the whole screen. So in other words, I want the whole screen to display as like the dark mode styles versus the whole screen to display as the light mode. So that's what it does. I've seen Apple clients still support dark mode without this, but without it, it doesn't work well in other clients. And I do, in fact, use this every time I send a dark mode email. One way to handle images in dark mode is to swap them. And in this, what you do is you define it in your header CSS to show or not show, right? So if it's showing the dark mode image, then hide the light mode one. Very similar to what you might be doing in responsive. And then you call that on the images within the body of the email, virtually just like you do with responsive design, right? One thing I've seen a lot of people that, as dark mode has been rolling out the last about 3 years now, I'd say it's gotten really popular, is that people are afraid to put this in their email, or maybe they're worried about trying it, or the fact that it won't necessarily display perfectly across all clients. What I say is, if you have a good chunk of your audience and they're reading emails in dark mode, then you should put this in. And honestly, if you're doing any kind of email coding yourself these days, chances are that you know about responsive design. And if you know how to code for that, then you know how to code for this. Don't be afraid to try it out. Start with this little section or do some testing on your own, and then work your way up to integrating this into all your email templates. Just like responsive, you can build yourself a stock style sheet of various styles for dark mode using your brand mandatory colors and things like that, and play around with it. That's the main thing I want people to take away. This is not any harder than any other email coding you do. Don't be afraid to try it out. So here's some tips for images in dark mode. One thing that I do is, especially with like product images, I just take the background out. Now I don't have to worry about swapping the images from light to dark mode. In fact, I very rarely do that unless it's something that I really need to do for that particular image, like a hero image where I need the background in, or something that's going to be there like every single time I make the email, like maybe a logo. But honestly, I just take out the background. I find that PNG comes out smoother than GIF, so you don't get these little jagged edges on the edge, like pixelation around your image. And then even to whether it's PNGs or whether it's GIF, to counter those jagged edges, you could put like a little white stroke or a little white outer glow around the product, which actually makes it look really cool when it flips over to dark mode. In light mode, you don't see that at all, right? Because it's white on white background. But then when you switch to dark mode, it kind of makes the product really kind of pop out. And in fact, you don't have to use white. You can use whatever color you want, because you're doing that. That is part of the image. It's not going to change the color there. The other thing to think about when getting ready for dark mode is, do I even have the imagery on hand, or do I need to make it? If it's something like a hero image where I'm going to use a swap as opposed to just white out the background and let it show through, in that case, think about when you're creating these and talking with your designers that, hey, we're going to need a version for light mode and a version for dark mode. Give them the heads up about that. If you want to remove the background yourself, because I'm trying to just do something quick and dirty, I've used Magic Eraser in Photoshop. That works well. But sometimes that'll like pick up colors that are elsewhere in the image or in the product. So another way to do this is to turn to our old friend, well, our new best friend, AI. Seems like everyone's turning there. I use Removal AI. It's pretty inexpensive, but it basically just goes through, removes the background, and then gives you back the image. So that's one way you can do it in only a minute or two if you quickly need to update an image to remove a background. Now let's talk a little bit about going back to dark mode in Gmail. So Gmail doesn't really read the media queries well, sometimes not at all. It depends on the flavor of Gmail, right? There's like, 4 kinds of Gmail these days. There's the one in your browser, there's the Gmail app, there's the Gmail app that works with certain clients in IMAP, Ganga. I'm sure you've heard of it. I believe that's all the flavors of Gmail we have. So those treat dark mode slightly differently. And you can search around for like that article I referenced before with the table from Email and Acid to see like kind of which ones do what. But one hack that goes around this is to use blends. So what a blend is you basically have one piece of content overlaid with the other piece of content, and then it takes the difference between these two to come up with the blend color. Okay, so that's one way that you can use that to make it work. And you do this by adding tags to your U plus body styles. In fact, you might want to declare a whole bunch of U plus body styles for the different things that you want to work in dark mode. This is primarily used on text. I mean, in theory, I suppose you could use it on images, but really it's about controlling, that the text remains a certain color when it inverts, or inverts to the right color when it's flipping between dark and light mode. So now this is an example of the actual code where you're targeting Gmail within the CSS, right? So you have your U body, and then you can add like a class name here, and then you put in the blends and the two blend colors that you want. So like if we use white and black, basically what this is doing, it's subtracting the foreground color from the background, or vice versa, depending on which mode we're in. And as long as they come out to the number that we want for the RGB color select, for the RGB numbers, it'll invert to the right color, right? Or you can make it stay the color you want it. So like, hey, I don't want you to invert white into black on a black background. I want you to keep the white text white. Or if I'm using some light colors, I don't want you to put a dark color in there. You can play around with this. You can use different colors. Not all of them will work well with this, but test it out and see what you can do. So now let's talk a little bit more about putting the smackdown on code bloat. So code bloat is a problem today that we see where there's a lot of, if our email gets really long, it can get clipped in Gmail and get clipped in Apple. And one way to reduce that size is to remove extraneous code. So one thing I like to do, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about dark mode, responsive, whatever, I like to simplify and use as little as code as possible. If I don't have to declare something 3 different ways, then I don't, right? That avoids the clipping, but it also avoids the chances for things to go kind of haywire in edge cases, right? The simpler, the better is usually how you want it to be. Another thing that you can do to reduce code is reduce redundant declarations, right? So, hey, if we already have the table width stated as a style, we probably don't need it as the width within the table. I know some people will talk about Outlook there, but most modern versions of Outlook, anything from like 2016 on, it'll read the style 1 as long as it's in line. You also, and I see this a lot in code that is generated with an editor, and then maybe, I generated this really quick and then now I'm going to edit it, duplicate and dead tag. So like it opens the tag, it closes the tag, it opens the tag, it closes the tag, then it opens the tag and actually has the content, and then it closes it, and then it adds 3 more dead nested tags below that. Tons of dead nested stuff. 1, that'll add code bloat to your template, but 2, it gives it more chances for things to go wrong or be picked up or misread or not parse right. So what I like is nice, clean code. That's usually one of my goals. Border equals 0 is another one that we used to put in. You used to have to put this around images. You put this on tables. I still use the border one for tables if I want to show the border, but you no longer really need to put that around a lot of different elements because the borders will no longer show automatically. That's kind of gone away. And then the other thing to think about is repeatedly nested tables. Usually if you're coding it and writing your code yourself, you probably don't have too much of this, that you see this more in editors, but think about like the table structure and minimize it. You don't want to have like a table within 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 a table, right? Like you want to have that. You want to use as little nesting as possible. The less it's nested, the less that, different clients will break it. Like Microsoft is notorious for this with adding little spaces and, the white lines. I've seen this in a few other clients, but, they're usually the leading offender. Here's another one of examples of old code. Remember when we used to do like Yahoo links and Yahoo body statements to control their code? Well, You don't really need to do this anymore. If you see an old template that you're reviving and it has a lot of this stuff in it, feel free to take that out. Yahoo has made some great strides in its rendering over the years. This stuff was really common probably 5 to 10 years ago. Now, we're all moving on to HTML5. We don't need to do that. I also still come across templates where, the people have just been reusing it forever, and there's a bunch of old Outlook stuff in there, very similar to this kind of example. Go ahead and get rid of that. We don't have to code like it's 2005 anymore. We can move into the current decade. A very interesting one was if you're using kinetic email and doing WebKit using CSS animations, you used to have to add this WebKit prefix to everything. Now you don't have to do that anymore as well. So you could take that out and go ahead and just simplify the code. All of these things are about simplifying the code, not only to reduce the file size, but to reduce the chances it breaks, right? The more complicated it is, the more kind of unusual rendering you're going to get in various edge case clients. And honestly, the other thing I would say is, think about who's really reading your email. Is it like 50% iPhone and Gmail on iPhone? That's usually what I find, is that, especially for anyone going to consumer audiences, Gmail is a massive portion of your list. Hotmail or MSN Live or other random client that has like 3 people out of 100,000 reading on it, I wouldn't be that concerned about them. What I would say is look at what the top 3 clients are on your list, the top 3 ways that people read email, and focus in on that. You want, the vast majority of your list to have it render right, as opposed to like worrying about that less than 1% edge case. Don't spend time there. Those people are used to having mangled emails. They love them. That's why they're still on that client. And to whoever needs to hear this, no more HTML4 doc types. Okay, move into HTML5. Literally just about every email client in the world that's come out in the last 10 years supports this. I don't know anyone using clients that don't support HTML5 today. So go ahead and move to that. It's a much simpler declaration, and you'll enjoy much better support. Now I want to talk a little bit about, how email clients have changed over time. Back in the 90s, when email was, first starting, when the email industry was more first starting out, email has been around for as long as I have. The top email clients back then were MSN, Hotmail, AOL, remember, used to get the CD in the mail, and Yahoo. And some version of these still exist today, although we have different clients that are the top ones. In 2008, 2 clients that were in use retired. One was Netscape Messenger, and the other was Microsoft Entourage. For those of you who used to work in like mixed Mac and PC offices, you may remember Entourage, which was like kind of like the Mac Outlook. But in 2008, those both got sunsetted. In 2009, with the end of Windows XP, Outlook Express finally breathed its last, and Mozilla Mail also ended their email client, which eventually then came back out as Thunderbird shortly after that. It wasn't until 2019, actually, that Gmail became the #1 client in April, according to email market client share. But email finally became #1 at that time in April. Apple's iPhone mail client was already within just like a percentage point or 2 of overtaking Gmail. So after fighting for years for the #1 spot and finally getting it, they immediately then got challenged by Apple, and I've now been trying to defend that title, and it kind of seesaws back and forth. I believe they're currently #2. In 2022, the dreaded Lotus Notes and its successor, IBM Notes, finally dies after years of losses in the ring. Somehow, Notes Domino still fights on. If you started coding around when I did back in the mid-2000s, Lotus Notes was something you worried about. I don't think anyone's really worried about them for 10 years, but they are finally done. And then in the near future, and I'll talk about this in a couple slides, Legacy Outlook is expected to be retiring. and they're going to be releasing a new version of Outlook. What does this mean for email coders? Well, the big thing is it means we no longer have to code like it's 1999 anymore. We can finally move into the current millennia. So as I was alluding to a moment ago, legacy Outlook for Windows is retiring at last. It's put up a great fight over the years. It's earned a lot of titles, some of which, could even be the most hated client of all time. But now it is finally going down, and the latest Outlook for Windows supports full modern HTML. You're no longer going to need to do everything with those ghost tables. Remember, tables will no longer be required for a layout in Outlook. My friend Justin said, we're going to be able to use div tags and actually have it read it. With the Windows 11 auto update, Legacy Outlook and Windows Mail will both update to the new Outlook. So this is something to be excited about. All these years, email coders have been banging on Microsoft's door, asking them to fix Outlook. Ever since, when I first started online in the 90s, Outlook actually rendered things pretty well. Then they decided they wanted to add spell checker. They had that built for Microsoft Word, and I believe that's why they moved into that for the rendering engine. Now, they just continued on with that for like the next, 20, 30 years, but now we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And legacy versions of Outlook are going to go away. We're going to have the modern Outlook. I mean, honestly, I've looked at like Outlook 2021 and Outlook.com, and they work great. I mean, they render things right, pretty much very similar to most other regular email clients, right? But some of the other versions, especially the older versions, like Outlook 2013, which is now finally fully sunsetted, man, that thing hung out forever, right? Like it just never really died. There was always people on it. And I suspect the same is happening with Outlook 2016 as well. That's another version that's staying around forever, but I expect that eventually to go the way of the dodo as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you learned a lot about how to code dark mode. One thing I'm going to tell you is that while the show is going on, I will be in the chat room. I will be at the show taking comments, questions. If you have things you want to talk about, I would love to talk about them. I've done coding for a long time, and I'm happy to help whoever, wants some help or has a quick question. If you want to show me an example, I'm happy to work on that. So yes, thank you for attending today. I hope you learned something. I've been Luke Glasser of Glasser Consulting, and have a great day.